Chapter 1, Homecoming. Returning to Harrow Slope after almost 10 years away should be a peaceful retreat. The town, located in a valley surrounded by dense trees, had always been a calm place, where nothing ever happened. As I traveled through the familiar roads, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt heavy, as if it possessed a dreadful quality. I left my car in front of my childhood home, a simple two-story structure that appeared to hang beneath the weight of time. Half a year ago, my mother vanished into the abyss and slipped into the shadows. I had returned to sort out her belongings and make the property available for purchase. When I went inside, I was greeted with a flood of both good and bad memories. The creaky floors, the musty odor of old furnishings, and the blurry images on the walls all reminded them of a simpler time. As I unloaded, I noticed a faint moving on the terrace. Excusing it as the breeze, I continued, but the sound persisted, becoming stronger and more tenacious. I walked to the window and gazed out into the dimly lit yard. Nothing, just shadows drifting in the breeze. Despite my concern, I continued with my assignment. Hours passed, and the day turned into night. I decided to take some time off and go to a neighboring bar, where I could potentially meet longtime friends and learn about the latest town gossip. As I walked around the town, I noticed a few missing individual banners up on the walls. Faces I didn't recognize looked back at me, their eyes filled with calm supplication. The tavern was dimly lit and barely occupied. I requested a drink and struck up a conversation with the bartender, a close friend named Tom. As we talked, I casually mentioned the missing folks. "It's been going on for more than a half year," Tom remarked quietly. "People just disappear. There are no fragments of information, no signs of battle. It's as if the darkness had swallowed them." A shiver went down my spine. My mother's death, while handled calmly, had always felt unusual to me. Could there be an association? Tom's gaze shifted to the side of the bar, where a group of elderly people were crouched together, muttering in low tones. Some claim it is a mockery, while others believe it was created by someone or something similar. The town has been concerned for a long time. "You should be cautious, Jake." I gestured, the worry in my stomach increasing. As I finished my drink and exited the bar, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The roads were unusually calm, and the shadows seemed to extend and wind, pulling jokes in my mind. Returning home, I double-checked the locks and windows before heading to bed. As I lay there, the silence was breathtaking, with every squeal and moan of the old home accentuated by the murkiness. The rest was subtle, with my mind racing with thoughts of the missing people and the strange events that appeared to be haunting Harrow Slope. In the early hours of the morning, I finally floated away, my dreams filled with ordinary people and mumbled alerts. The awful dream had only just started. Chapter 2, Unraveling Secrets. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of unease. Still hoping to learn the truth behind the disappearances, I headed to the local library. The library was an old, Gothic structure with a vast collection of volumes containing insider information from the past. I spent hours going through ancient papers and town records. One story caught my attention, a series of unusual disappearances that occurred in the 1920s. All of the casualties had been discovered dead, with their bodies so badly damaged that they could not be identified. The town was gripped with dread, and the homicides had never been solved. The neighborhood tale told of a drab figure, a silent stalker who pursued the unaware. As I went deeper, I discovered a name that kept repeating. Elias Blackwood was a hermetic man who lived on the outskirts of town. Rumors circulated regarding his involvement in dreary rituals and the mysterious. When he vanished unexpectedly, the homicides ceased, and the village endeavored to ignore. As I scanned the dusty documents, the curator, an elderly woman with piercing eyes, approached me. "You are digging into old injuries, young friend. A few things have been improved and covered." I looked up, scared. "I want to know what's going on here. Are there any connections between these recent disappearances?" She mumbled, her eyes filled with deep anguish. "The past has a tendency to retread the same things. Elias Blackwood was rarely discovered, and some believe his soul is tormenting this community. Be wary, Jake. Reality can be risky. I left the library with a mix of fear and confidence. The pieces of the mystery were beginning to come together, but the image they created was dim and unsettling. Might Elias Blackwood have been involved in the latest events in some way? Could it be argued that he returned, or was it something, or someone else? As I walked back home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. The roads were terrifyingly quiet. The only sound was the crush of stones beneath my feet. Then I heard a subtle movement behind me. I turned, but there was nothing there, simply darkness and silence. When I arrived home, I noticed a piece of paper hidden under the entrance. Unfurling it, I discovered a sketchy drawing of a figure wrapped in mystery, with a single message scribbled beneath, "Be careful." My heart pounded as I scanned the area, but there was no sign of anyone. The note felt like a warning, a message from someone who knew more than they let on. I put it in my pocket and resolved to be more careful. That evening, as I laid in bed, the terror intensified. The house seemed to scream and moan with an evident surge of energy, and every shadow felt like a threat. Rest came in fits and starts, accompanied by nightmares of a shadowy figure stalking me down long corridors. Chapter 3: The First Encounter. I awoke with a start, soaked in sweat. The morning light filtered through the draperies, but the sense of anxiousness from the night before lingered. I chose to visit the outskirts of town, where Elias Blackwood had lived, because my decision to continue with my investigation was not yet final. The excursion took me through deep woods, with the trees casting lengthy, frightening shadows. I came to the remains of an old, flimsy lodge hidden deep in the woods. The air around it felt heavy and oppressive, as if the ground itself remembers the dark events that had occurred there. The lodge entryway squeaked open, revealing a room filled with strange imagery and candles. On a table was a collection of photos of the missing people. My gut turned as I realized my mother's photograph was among them. A hand suddenly clamped over my lips, and I was jerked in the opposite direction. A voice whispered in my ear, "You shouldn't have come here." I fought, but the clasp was like iron. My captor dragged me deeper into the woods, and I felt the world fade away into darkness. I awoke in a cool, boring basement. My brain pulsed and my hands were shackled. As I struggled against the limits, I felt a rush of alarm. The room was filled with a startling sense of fear. A doorway squeaked open, and a figure emerged into the dim light. The quiet stalker was a tall man with vacuous eyes and a sinister grin. He spoke in a low, gravelly voice, detailing the historical context of Harrow Slope and his role in its hazy history. He claimed to be Elias Blackwood's relative, following in the heritage of dread. "Jake," he said, inclining directly in front. "Your mother discovered reality. She attempted to stop me, but she failed. Now is your chance to join the others." Distress energized me. I figured out how to cut my wrists free and shoved at him. We fought, and in the chaos, I grabbed a shard of glass from the floor and smashed it into his chest. He let out a throaty scream and collapsed. Wheezing for air, I staggered out of the cellar and into the woods. The sun was rising, casting a pale light across the woods. I realized I needed to go to the police and put an end to this awful dream. Chapter 4: Awakening. We learned more about the stalker's den thanks to the police. The lodge was a hallowed site for murkiness, filled with evidence of his terrifying demonstrations. As the examination progressed, I realized that he had been operating unobserved for quite some time, pursuing the powerless and leaving a trail of distress. The town of Harrow Slope eventually began to heal, but the wounds lingered. Individuals began to return, and life resumed its typically expected pace. Yet the shadows of the past lingered. I sold my mother's home and am about to leave Harrow Slope for good. Nonetheless, when I pressed my belongings, I discovered a case in the loft. Inside were letters and diaries that had a place with my mother. They detail her investigation into our family's dark history and her efforts to track down the stalker. Reading her words, I felt a connection with her that I hadn't felt in years. She had not fully committed to protecting her village and her loved ones. I realized that her soul, her bravery, was a part of mine. As I exited Harrow Slope, I reflected one last time. The town, with all of its adversity and magnificence, had given me strength about the darkness and the light within all of us. I recognized I would carry its lessons with me forever, preparing for the shadows while constantly advancing toward the light. The awful dream was over. Chapter 5. The Final Showdown. With the disclosures from my mother's diaries firmly in my hands, I felt a renewed sense of direction. The secrecy that had enveloped Harrow Slope was more intimate than I had anticipated, intertwined with the traditions of my own family. As I made plans to leave town, I was plagued by a sense of unfinished business. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out of order. As the sun set on my final day in Harrow Slope, an unexpected, dreadful thump reverberated throughout my empty house. I approached Delegate Collins, whose face was pale and strained. "Jake, there's been another occurrence," he announced cheerfully. "We want you to accompany us." My heart dropped. "Another vanishing?" I inquired, dreading the response. "Actually, no, not precisely," he replied, driving me to his car. "Something occurred at the station." The drive to the police headquarters was uncomfortable, and the representative kept quiet about the details. As we arrived, the scene was chaotic. Officials rushed around, and a palpable sense of dread pervaded the place. I dashed inside, where the police chief had anticipated. "Jake, he's requesting you," the supervisor replied, his voice tense. He drove me to the cross-examination room. Through the one-way glass, I saw him, my aggressor, the stalker, who was still alive despite my efforts in the woods. His perseverance was a secret that chilled my core. "We assumed we had him contained," the supervisor explained, his disappointment evident. "Whatever the case may be, he eventually escaped. They brought down 2 of our soldiers. He's back in guardianship now, but he won't say anything yet." "Why me?" I asked, but a part of me already knew the answer. "He is fixated on your family, Jake. I believe you're on your way to some final venture." With a big breath, I entered the cross-examination room, the door shutting behind me. The stalker remained there, his eyes filled with malicious fury. "Welcome, Jake," he mumbled. "I realized you'd return to me. What is it that you need?" I inquired, my voice steady despite the agitation within me. "To finish what we started," he replied, grinning devilishly. "You and I are linked by blood and haziness. Your mother tried to break the relationship, but she just strengthened it." I pulled back, sickened. "What are you referring to?" He leaned forward, lowering the volume. "Your mother was not only exploring the murkiness, she was a part of it, Jake. She was one of us until she betrayed our cause." I struggled to cope with his comments, my mind racing. The fact that my own mother could have been involved was inconceivable. However, the pieces began to fit together, creating an evil image of hidden bits of knowledge. "No, you're lying," I responded, but the question bothered me. He snickered, which freaked me out. "Accept what you will. However, it will close this evening." The room rocked abruptly as an audible blast echoed throughout the structure. Lights glinted and went out, splitting us into darkness. Among the chaos, I heard the doorway being opened. In terror, I realized the stalker had arranged all this. In utter darkness, I heard his whisper near my ear. "We should end this dance." As I wrestled blindly with him, I felt a rush of adrenaline. His solidarity was immense, but sorrow gave me power. As we fought, my hand brushed over a dropped official's handgun. I grabbed it firmly and pointed it toward his last strength. "Stop!" I yelled, expecting this to end without any more carnage. He paused and hung silently between us for a moment. Then, with a terrifying laugh, he thrusts at me. The firearm went off, creating an uproarious break in the silence, followed by a crash as his corpse hit the ground. I sat there, breathing heavily, waiting for the crisis lights to turn on. When they finished, I noticed him lying there, still and lifeless. It was truly finished throughout this time. As a result, the police resolved his final arrangement. He had planned to blow up the station, taking me and many others with it. His focus on my family, along with the ambiguity he recognized we shared, had been his undoing. As I left Harrow Slope the next morning, the sun rose over a town that felt brighter, free of the shadow that had hung over it for so long. Reality regarding my mother's involvement remained murky, a component of her past that may never be fully understood. However, I imparted the message that I had confronted the darkness and made do, not only for myself, but also for the entire community of Harrow Slope. The last confrontation left visible and subtle scars, but it also represented a new beginning. Epilogue: the aftermath. The village of Harrow Slope gradually began to recover, but the scars of the past would never completely go. The missing people were mourned, and the legend of the quiet stalker became a useful example, whispered among the residents. I stayed in Harrow Slope, changing my mother's home into a safe haven for anyone affected by the stalker's reign. My encounter transformed me, providing me with further motivation. The darkness that had once consumed the town had been banished, but the memory of the discreet stalker would always linger in the shadows. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of darkness. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more chilling tales. Remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that hide in plain sight.